Takes me to an almost final point. When still in my UNFCCC job, I also often used to look jealously at the WTO negotiations. Not that they're doing any better, but because of the mindset that I associate with that process. The climate change process is often seems to be almost solely about legally binding targets defined through a top-down process that results in penalties for non-compliance. All sticks, no carrots, except for the empty bank accounts that I talked about earlier. By contrast, the WTO has always struck me as something nations want to be part of because it brings them real, tangible benefits. Call me naive if you will. My point is that rules should be defined to safeguard well-functioning processes. I can understand the need for reporting rules, fiduciary standards and transparency, as well as the need to link these to the right to participate in market-based mechanisms and receive financial support. My strong plea would be to first let countries formulate their own targets through a process of debate and public scrutiny. Secondly, to determine adequacy of commitments based on collective action rather than based on individual efforts. Third, to write targets and commitments into national law rather than an unenforceable international agreement. And fourth, to stimulate compliance through incentives rather than through penalties. To conclude, these are tough times to address the long-term challenges of climate change and other sustainability megaforces, but I do believe that we can make progress. The publication of the next IPCC assessment report and the prospects of a new climate change deal in 2015 both offer a real opportunity to galvanize public opinion and political action. But we need to ensure that the IPCC process is credible and that there is both political will to act and political ability to act. The UN architecture already provides many of the mechanisms needed to assist developing countries in mitigation and adaptation to the effects of climate change. But better use needs to be made of that architecture. There are lessons to be learned from business, not least a greater focus on incentives as opposed to only penalizing action as a stronger way of motivating advances. One of the things that I have not advocated today is bringing a host of academics, NGOs and businesses into an already overcrowded intergovernmental negotiating process. I've tried to illustrate the many opportunities I see to engage academia, business, civil society and interagencies more effectively around analysis, governance, architecture and action. My most powerful memory of Copenhagen is that world leaders understand the issues at stake, the responsibilities they have, and the need to compromise. As a consequence, I very strongly believe in the ability and willingness of world leaders to forge a strong 2015 outcome. The challenge is to provide them with an appealing proposition. My most powerful recollection of the climate change process is that there are so many organizations and individuals out there who want to be part of the solution and bring some business process, some business sense to what is happening. One of my first lessons in negotiations was how important it is to bring the right people to the table. Bringing the right people to the table does not mean bringing everyone to the table. And bringing the right people to the table does not mean that others are the wrong people with no role to play. In fact, the opposite is true. The answer lies in intelligent engagement, and this event has helped us, I think, to understand better what that could mean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ivo de Boer, for very inspirational and wise words. I'd next like to invite Dr. Yasuko Kamiyama, to act as discussant to this keynote presentation. Dr. Kamiyama is head of the Center for Social and Environmental Systems Research, the Sustainable Social Systems section of the National Institute for Environmental Studies, or NIES as it is known for as well. She has published widely on climate change policy, both in Japan and internationally, and Dr. Kamiyama also teaches at the Tokyo University. Please.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor for me to be here to discuss Mr. De Boer, former Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. Being engaged in climate change regime making for over 20 years, mainly as a scholar of international relations, and sometimes as a member of Japanese delegation to the COPs in its early years. I cannot think of any other opportunities that could be more honorable than this. So in this regard, I would like to thank Professor Kanye and the organizers for having me here today. We have been hearing a lot of difficulties on climate change negotiation as well as the Earth system governance in general. The difficulties we face today in recent years is observed in many other multilateral processes, and there are various reasons behind. Let me introduce some of it. First, in the early 1980s, we still had some key superpower playing the role as hegemons, supplying the world with common goods, including construction of multilateral institutions and supporting the institutions financially and technically. But today, we find almost no country that is willing to take the same role. Second, we used to see a clear north-south divide between the developed and the yet to be developed. And the latter countries formed a strong group, namely G77 plus China, to pressure developed nations to take stronger actions. Today, such group is quite diversified, and it's getting more difficult for those countries to consolidate their positions to pressure the rich countries. Thirdly, in the 1980s, nation states used to be the main actors in negotiating processes as well as at implementation stage. Today, although national government still is the main player, transnational activities of their subnational actors, such as industries, NGOs, researchers, have become more and more influential. Lastly, because of the points raised above, we were able to expect solutions to global environmental problems of multilateral environmental agreements regimes back in the 1980s. Today, the MEAs are at the deadlock, and we are seeking for a new way of governance. The subtitle of this whole conference was Complex Architecture, Multiple Agents. And I saw in the program some of the session titles called Multi-Level Governance or Fragmentation of Governance. So I think what I said above is shared among many of you who are here. In the last 3 days or 4 days in this conference,